How's it going, everyone? Good? Yeah? Survived Easter, and the sunshine, and then the rain, and the snow, and the sunshine again. Looks like a lot of people are enjoying the sunshine probably, right? Well, hi. Good morning. I'm Pastor Alex, and today we're about to do something new. So for the first part of the year, we went through the book of Daniel for the most part, right? And at least from what I could tell, this church really enjoyed that. All right? People really, really liked it. And I don't think it's because I did exceptionally well. The more I thought about it and the more I talked with people about why, what I really think people liked about Daniel is just how relevant we realized Daniel was, right? Daniel is this captive, taken from his home in Jerusalem and has to live in Babylon. And it's not just a matter of the guy moved somewhere, right? Babylon destroyed his home, took him, captured him, and then he had to work for the very government that had ruined his life. And what's so challenging and interesting about his life is how faithfully he followed God, but yet faithfully served his oppressor. And it's just so interesting to see that it's so contrary to how we would want to handle that situation, right? We'd want vengeance, I'm sure. And I'm sure Daniel wanted vengeance. We'd want to rebel, to take down this evil nation and get back to our home and rebuild it. And I'm sure that's what he wanted. But he never did that. Instead, what he did is he lived life as best he can in his circumstances, following God. And following God did not entail violence, retribution, rebellion, revolution, any of that. In fact, he built up Babylon because he was a man of God. And I think we enjoyed this series because it's so relevant for today. Because at the end, what we saw was a man following God in an ungodly world, right? And I think that's what we're so interested to learn about. We're so interested to ask this question and answer of what does it look like to follow God faithfully, without violence, without anger, without hate, and be a part of our own communities today, now, and be good citizens while also being good Christians. And so, as I was thinking through, well, what do we do next? I landed on the book of 1 Peter. One, because I like to read the Bible. Two, because I like this alternating between Old Testament and New Testament so that we're getting both. But the thing about 1 Peter is it's all about the exact same thing. And so now for the next couple months, that's exactly what we're going to do. And I think I want this to just be our theme for the year. Us as a church coming together on Sundays to worship our God in a world that's not worshiping God, right? And figuring out how we together can be a community of encouragement, a community that's different, and a community that grows strong in this mission that we have to change our world through the power of God, even though our world is resistant to what we're doing, but to do it in a way that isn't how the rest of the world would handle a situation like this, but rather do it in a way that God's called us to. Because when we do things God's way, we change the world. We build the kingdom that he's trying to build rather than work against it like everyone else who doesn't follow God. So, sound good? Should we keep going on this theme, on this topic? All right, then let's read 1 Peter, shall we? So it'll be on the screen as we go, and we're just going to start with this first section. So 1 Peter 1, chapter 1, verse 1, right at the beginning. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. Super simple. Peter is writing this letter. To God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. That's weird. Grace and peace be yours in abundance. All right. We probably move past this really quickly normally, right? But this is really important because we learn two important things here that Peter's working with at the very beginning. So the first is we know who he's writing this letter to, right? To exiles scattered throughout provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. And all of these places, if we were to look at a map, are basically in modern-day Turkey. And this is interesting because we're not in Jerusalem. We're not in Israel. He is writing to people who follow the God of Israel who are not living there. But you'll notice, in order for this to really gain its power, we have to be aware of the fact that he did not write this to Americans in Fort Lupton in 2023. Now, the Bible is for us. The Word of God is relevant for us. But if we want to really see the power of what's going on here, we have to take a moment to step into Peter's shoes and to step into the shoes of the people who are receiving this letter. So let me tell you a little bit about this time period in history where Caesar of Rome is claiming to be the ruler of the world. And at this point, it's guessed that Nero is probably Caesar right now. And that's important because Nero did not like Christians. But why? Why did Christians get such a bad rap? I want to tell you about this. So the world back then was not like how it is today. And I'm sure we've all watched movies from time to time where they're living in like Greek and Roman times and they're worshiping all of these, what we call mythological gods now, right? The pantheon. You have a god of the water, of the sky, of fertility, of harvest, gods for everything that you can think of, right? And then on top of that, you've got gods from your own family. To some extent, right? So you've got to be praying all the time that if you want your harvest to go well, you need the sun god on your side and whoever's in charge of the rain, right? And if you want to have babies to help you work on that farm, you got to be talking to the God that's going to help with that. And if you're going to go to war, you need the God that's going to help you get that done, right? And in movies, when we see this, they talk about the gods and how they're there, but then usually the good guy, the guy who's the hero and tough and masculine, like he'll play along, but he usually has this bit of skepticism, right? Like I personally think of Brad Pitt playing this role of like, yeah, I follow the gods, but I don't know, what have they ever done for me, right? We've seen these movies, right? No, that's a sham. That's how people think today when we talk about God. But 2,000 years ago, when life was hard, and whether or not it rained that year or not could cost your life and the stability of your entire family, there was nobody anywhere skeptical about the gods. And you prayed to them as you were told, because if you didn't, there were consequences. If you make the rain god angry, you're not going to eat this year. In fact, not only are you not going to eat this year, no one in your entire city is going to eat that year, right? If you don't pray to the war god, it's not just, we're going to lose a battle. Our entire nation could fall to the ground. So you get in line. You make sure the gods are happy with us. Otherwise, we all suffer. We don't think this way today. But this is how people thought back then. Does that make sense? They really, all of them, believed their lives weren't just in the hand of God, but their lives were in the hands of a lot of gods. And they all needed to be happy all the time. Otherwise, it wasn't just one person who suffered, but it would be entire communities, whole towns, the whole nation, right? And then come Christians. And Christians are weird because originally, Christians were just Jewish people, which was fine because they didn't follow the rules like everyone else. See, everyone else is trying to make all the different gods happy all the time, but the Jews don't do this. In fact, they're really, really, really critical of people who do this, right? They only worship one God. But they've been around a really, really long time. And what's interesting about the God that they worship is that he's not like their gods where you have some doing things over here and some doing things over here and some over here. The God of the Jews is over everything. I don't know if you know Jonah super well, but remember when they're on the boat and they're like, well, what God do you worship, Jonah? And he says, I answer to the God that created the heavens and the earth and the seas. I worship the God that's over everything and more powerful than all of them. And what do they say? Well, let's have a theological debate. They say, well, we believe in a ton of gods, and we really like yours. Get him involved in saving us, right? And so the Jews have been around so long that even though they weren't like everyone else, because they claimed to follow a God that was so powerful, and they had survived for so many millennia, people in this time period kind of gave them a pass. They're like, you know what, you're different than us, but you know what, you seem to be doing all right. So that must be a sign that your God is actually different than ours, and he lets you get away with this. So because you've been here so long and we're coexisting, we'll just be friends. But then Jesus comes along and does something just groundbreaking and says, you don't have to be a Jew to be a part of the family of Israel anymore. And the family of Israel is the family of this one true God. And so what happens all throughout Rome and Greece and this part of Eastern Europe, Western Asia, Middle Eastern stuff, all of these people who aren't Jews begin following that one God and following Jesus specifically, saying he's that one God. And it's weird. And they walk around talking as if the other gods don't exist anymore. And they talk with each other and they say, I love you, brother. I love you, sister. That's weird. You love your brother and your sister. Are you supposed to do that? Yes, people thought they were incestuous. And then they would talk about, well, what do you guys do together? Oh, we eat the blood and the body of our God. So you're cannibals too. And what else do? They reject every other god. They stop going to pagan festivals. They don't sacrifice food and wine and crops the way you're supposed to. Not only are their practices kind of giving them a weird personal life, and I'm a little suspect if I'd want to be alone with them, but now people in Greece and Rome are starting to wonder, when things go wrong, is this because of all these Christians denying these other gods? Is it because these other Christians are making them angry and making us all suffer? Is it because these people are breaking the very fabric of our culture and society? They called Christians atheists. And they pointed them and said, you guys are dangerous. And so that's why Peter begins to write this letter the way he does to God's elect, to God's people, exiles scattered through these provinces. But what's interesting is these people aren't exiles. They're probably in their native homes, but they're beginning to be treated like foreigners, like immigrants, like people who aren't supposed to be there. Why? Because they're beginning to live differently. And they're breaking all the rules. It's like right now, if you just start saying, you know what, how about us Christians? Let's start driving on the left side of the road. It's just not going to work. And you think, well, that's different, Alex. If we started doing that, people are going to get really hurt. People might die. We might die. That's what they think. They see these atheists claiming there's only one God, and all the others are fake and powerless. And they say, you guys are going to ruin everything. You guys are living a life that's dangerous. And so as things begin to go wrong, because in our world things go wrong all the time, we say we need someone to blame. And in a culture like this, in an environment like this, it was very easy to begin blaming these Christians that were popping up all over the place. And you get to a place where it almost climaxes around the time when we think this letter is being written, where Nero is Caesar in Rome, and there's a massive fire. And Rome is burning. And they say, how did this happen? Because again, we don't have running water. We don't have fire hydrants. We don't have fire trucks. Fires are a big problem 2,000 years ago. And it's devastating. And they say, we need someone to blame. And they look at their ruler. They say, Nero, how could you let this happen? How could you let our city burn? Why weren't there policies in place? Why weren't there procedures? Why didn't we do something better, faster, sooner? And Nero has to give answers to a failure in his leadership. And what does he say? We did everything we could. But the gods are angry with us because we've got Christians living a dangerous life here in Rome. They don't submit to these gods. They don't submit to me as a God. And they begin to kill Christians. We have written down in history that Nero took this so far that if you were to visit his royal garden at night, Christians would be on crosses set on fire to light his garden. This is the kind of persecution that people have to endure to follow Jesus. They're treated like they're foreigners in their homeland. They're treated like immigrants who are a threat to the culture of their homeland, and they're treated like they're dangerous. And Peter is saying, hey, I'm one of you. I'm one of the ones that walked with Jesus. I knew him personally. I know the power that he has and what he's done. And I'm writing a letter to you guys. And I know what it's like to live like an exile in your homeland. And then he talks about this, to you who have been a chosen people according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient with Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. What in the world is going on? If you're into really theological debates, then this is a passage where you might be thinking, oh, he's talking like, are we chosen by God? Do we have free will? Peter's helping us with this question. That's not actually what he's trying to talk about here. What he's trying to do is he's trying to let these people know, because he's writing to people who are not Jews. And for us, we're like, yeah, so what? None of us are Jews, and we're following Jesus. That was really weird for most of human history. To follow the God of Israel without being a Jew wasn't possible for the most part. And so these people, he's writing to a certain fear or doubt that's probably in their head of, they're wondering, as I go through this persecution, should I actually be following Jesus? And there's also a lot of Jews walking around saying, yeah, probably not. You're not actually allowed to be in this family of God because you're from a different family. But what Peter is trying to say, hey guys, you're actually a part of this family now. You guys are proof of the promise that the Israelites have had for a long, long time. Where Abraham was told, someday through his family, the entire world would be saved by the family of God. And so what Peter is saying is what you're going through right now isn't because you made a bad choice. It's not because you're not welcome, and it's not because God messed up. But in fact, he's trying to bring them comfort of, hey, I know what you're going through, but God knew that you were going to be in this family from the very beginning. And so today, don't let the persecution that you're going through be a reason to think that you're not welcome in the presence of God, or that he's mad at you, or that the people around you calling you out and persecuting, don't you dare think that they're right. You are, in fact, a part of the family of God. You are a part of the plan that he's had to save the whole world, and you may not be a Jew, but by living in obedience to Jesus, were sprinkled with his blood, which sounds really weird. But we have to remember what we talked about last week. Through the blood of Christ, he fought death and walked out of his grave. And every apostle afterwards tells us over and over and over that when we come into union with Christ, when we follow him as our King, the death and the resurrection happens to us too. We have been made clean, and we have been given entrance into this new family. So he's saying, this was the plan all along. And if you think you're not welcome, remember, the blood of Christ has cleaned you. You're not the person you once were. This is the book of 1 Peter. This is why it's relevant to us in Fort Lupton in 2023 today. Verse 3. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. This inheritance is kept in heaven for you, who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. Again, we've got to put this in the context of what's going on. We just went through Daniel, and Daniel is a man living as an exile, as a captive in Babylon, surrounded by evil, powerful men who ruined his life, but yet he is called to serve. And what does God tell him over and over and over? Don't worry. I'm actually in control. And someday I am going to remove the world of every evil ruler. And I'm going to give you a king that rules perfectly over the whole world with perfect goodness and justice and peace. And when that happens, the world will never be the same, because you won't have evil people killing and oppressing people for their own power and gain, but instead you'll have this king that I brought who doesn't live that way. In fact, when he rules, he does it in such a way that life flourishes. It's not destroyed. Instead, we live a life that is good. Right? And what's the promise of Daniel 7 that we talked about last week? That is connected to Jesus. And Jesus believes he is that king, and he has come. And so what Peter is trying to say here is that it's happened. We live a new life now because Jesus rose from the grave. But it didn't happen how we thought it was going to happen. Why is Nero still burning our people for fun? That's what Peter is addressing now. That we can't lose sight of the fact that even though evil still seems to have power in this world, Jesus rose from the dead. He has power unlike Nero's. Jesus may not have solved this problem the way I would have solved it, but we're not God. And the hope that we have that our world will someday be absent of evil isn't a hope that we don't have anymore. In fact, we need to have more hope, because we've seen Jesus fight evil face to face, and we watched Jesus endure their worst weapon. We watched them kill him. He walked out of his grave. And what is an inheritance? It's something that you're given from your Father. Jesus was given power over life and death. And he's saying that inheritance is still real, and it's for you, but it's kept in heaven. And this isn't saying, well, life will just be better when you're dead. That's really what God meant. He's not actually going to fix the world. He's just going to make it so that you can die and go somewhere better. Now, a lot of times with how we're framed to read the Bible, that might sound like what he's saying, but he's not. He's saying, no, that inheritance is still alive with Jesus. And where is Jesus right now? Do you know? At the right hand of the Father. And where does God live right now? His throne is in heaven. He's above this world. But what's our hope? That this inheritance will never spoil or fade. It's kept in heaven for you who through faith. So in other words, this inheritance is kept for those of you who follow Jesus. You're shielded by God's power. In other words, if they kill you, that power has no power over you until the coming of salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. No, our hope isn't just waiting till we die. Our hope is knowing that Jesus has the power to do what Daniel promised us from the beginning. And he proved that by dying and then walking out of his grave fully alive and healed. And so now we move forward in a hope that our inheritance isn't spoiled or gone, but it's still with Jesus, who is still alive, and he's coming back. And when he does, we will receive a salvation that is completely and truly holistic. And we will get the world that we've been waiting for so long. This has been really theological, deep stuff. I hope you know that. Are you still with me? Are we moving forward? All right, let's get into a piece where some of you might be asking the question, okay, Alex, but what does it all mean? Why are we reading this? This isn't as helpful as Daniel was, and certainly not as crazy action-packed stories, right? Well, let's keep going. In all this is verse 6, you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. For you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. When I was 12 or 13, my entire life changed. I grew up in a middle-class family, not super far from here, went to a nice school, had all the things I could ever want. There was always food on the table. And one day, my mom, after school, came into my room, just me and her, and she said, there's something I have to tell you. I haven't told your sister yet, because I don't think she's ready, but you need to get on the same page. So sit down. And she looked at me and she said, there's something you don't know about our family. And in this conversation, she revealed to me about the drugs and the alcohol that had come into my parents' lives and how she wasn't sure that they were going to stay married. And once my eyes were opened to this, things only got worse. And over the course of a year or two, I watched drugs and alcohol and really every single vice that can come into a marriage destroy the entire life I had known. To a point where finally, there was so much dysfunction, my parents did get divorced. And I moved from the home that I had lived in for most of my life, moved away from the neighbors and the friends that I had had for most of my life, changed schools. Everything that I had, my home, my friends, and even my family, were taken from me. And I had to begin high school completely and totally alone. And I can tell you, the last point in a person's life that someone should feel crushed and wrecked and abandoned is when they walk into the doors of a high school. my life was terrible. And I couldn't help but wonder, how are things going to be okay? And here's the thing, the kicker, I didn't do anything wrong. There was no point where I could sit and reflect and say, well, you know what? Maybe if I had just done something better, this wouldn't have happened, right? I couldn't say, well, Alex, you know what? Next time you're walking on this road and you see the crossroads, go left next time. Just do it a little bit different. It'll be better. No. My life was ruined completely by the choices of other people. And I didn't know how to move forward. But I did have to make choices where I was at. And in this situation, I did what a lot of people don't do. I decided I'm going to get to know God really, really well. Because I've watched people disconnected from God ruin my family. And someday, I'm going to have a family. See, this was a point in my life where things really began to change, where I really started to become an adult, and I had this switch turn in my head where I realized, as a kid, you think, oh, I'm going to grow up and get married and have kids. It's going to be great. But you don't know what in the world you're talking about. And I realized, kind of in this season of my life, this is actually going to happen someday. I'm actually going to marry a real human being. And I'm going to have kids that I'm going to be responsible to take care of and provide for. And I don't know how to describe it. Maybe you had an experience like this in your life, but it was just a moment where all of this became real. And I realized right there in that moment, I needed to start living like I was going to be a husband and a father someday. And I knew that if I didn't do something different, I'm going to end up just like my parents. I don't want that to happen. That's not at all what I'm planning to do. But if I don't make wise choices, if I'm not intentional, I know the chances are really high that in 20 years I'll wake up one day and be like, I'm my dad, or I'm my mom, repeating the same cycle of problems over and over. And I got scared thinking, what if I can't break the cycle? And I went to God. And I went into a season of my life when I was alone and felt rejected and abandoned and scared, and said, God, you are the only one who can save me. And I asked on a very regular basis that I would be changed, that he would walk with me as I continued to grow up, so that by the time I was a man, I would be a different man than my father was, and a different adult than my mother was. And don't mishear me. I love my father, and I love my mother, and they cared for me in so many amazing ways. I'm not trying to make it sound like I had these terrible parents and I hate them. But they did put me in this season. And what Peter is trying to tell these Christians who are in a situation caused by the decisions of other people persecuting them, that what we need to do in this season is use it as an opportunity to go closer to God. Because someday, he's coming back. And when that happens, the wait is over. We will have this perfect world, but when we endure these times of trial and suffering, it's always going to put us in a situation where we have to make a choice. Do I actually want to live the life that God's calling me to so that I can be a part of this greater kingdom of goodness and peace and justice? Or am I going to say, you know what? Screw this. I'm going to live like everyone else and find my way to maneuver and take advantage and take chances so that this life is the good one. So that I can just survive in my hometown and get to just be like everyone else. And Peter is reminding them that they decided to follow Jesus for a reason. Because the world is terrible. The world is full of people who burn living humans for their own enjoyment. That's a true story. That happened. And that kind of evil is still around today. And Peter is reminding us that if we lose hearts and we give up, we're gonna miss out. Because remember, being obedient to Jesus isn't just about following the rules. It's not about, well, is God going to be happy with me or is he going to be mad at me? No, God loves you. But it's about saying, we're going to be on board with living the way God called us to, living with goodness and justice and peace, so that everywhere we go, we begin to transform our world into the kingdom that God is bringing. Or we can say, you know what? This is too hard. And I'm going to live like everyone else, where my belly will be full every day, and things will be easy, and I can just get through without the hassle. Which that doesn't seem like it's a big deal, Alex. But that's the thing about evil. It's not like the movies where you've got some big supervillain causing all the problems, but it's a whole world of people just making one small choice after another small choice to just live for us. Until, before you know it, we have a world completely absent of love. And Peter's saying, don't do that. I know God didn't do what we wanted him to do. He didn't fulfill this promise that we had in Daniel quite the way we wanted him to. But he did, in fact, do it. So even though we have a new king of this world, even though there is a new ruler in place, even though Nero has had power stripped from him, even though it doesn't look like it, and we don't see Jesus on the throne like we see Nero on the throne right now, we need to continue living in the hope that we have, because we know it's real. Because even though Jesus may not standing beside him, you know, because so many of us were there, Jesus walked out of his grave. Peter knows he was there. And so Peter is trying to remind them, Jesus is who he says he is. And you might be suffering grief right now for any sort of reason. But don't forget that you are a part of a family that has been around for thousands of years. And the mission that God gave them is yours now. You are to be God's partner. You are to be a part of this movement and this kingdom that changes the whole world. So I know right now it may be tough, but it won't always be this way. But if you give up now, it's only going to get worse, and it will never, ever be fixed. And so this is the beginning of Peter. This is the message he's writing to us. And we might not be living in Turkey in the first century, but life can be really hard. And it can be difficult to believe that God is actually doing something about it and that God is actually sitting on a throne ruling over the world when it just doesn't look like it. But as we go through 1 Peter, I want us to come to it with open eyes and an open heart, ready to challenge what the world is telling us we should believe about what's true and what's not true. And remember that Peter's wisdom comes from a place that's real. He watched Jesus die, and he watched him walk out of his grave. And what he has to say to these people is going to help us today. And so I'm going to ask you that as we end service today, as we end this message, that you can commit this week and over the next couple months to begin a journey of prayer, asking God to open your eyes to what the scriptures have for us, to let your ears hear what God has to say, and to ask for strength. Because what God asks us to do in this world where Jesus reigns, but there's still evil on this world, is going to push us to do things that we would never do otherwise. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to be challenging, but I promise you, it is worth it. All of us have a new identity now. We don't need to live like the rest of the world because we're not like them. We are in the family of God. Our King is no one outside these doors, but the King of the world who is with us and in us always. Will you pray with me?